What we're going to do this morning is discuss Indian foreign policy, especially in recent times, and we're going to discuss it with the person who's in charge of that foreign policy. And we are going to try and uncover and unclutter um, some of his work over the last 6 months since he's taken office, and try and piece together what this session attempts to do is what we call the India way. So let me start with that as my first question to you, sir. What is that India way? How are we managing contests, conflicts, disruptions, and how are we making our presence felt in the international arena?
Well, first of all, let me say that it's very good to be here. Thank you, Samir and the ORF team. I think you've done a splendid job as you've done the last 4 years. And it's good to see so many people from across the world, from India. Uh, so let me respond to your question. What is the India way? So I'd put it. Let me start with what is not the India way. Okay. I think it is not the India way to be an disruptionist power internationally. I think we should be a stabilizing power. I think there are already enough forces of disruption in the world. So somebody needs to make up a bit. It's also not the India way to be self-centered, to be mercantilist. Therefore, it's important to be global. It's important to be law-abiding or rule-based, whichever way you like. By the way, I think of rules as something more than law, not as less than law, but that's my view. It's important to be consultative. So if you ask me, therefore, give me 4-5 sharp descriptions of what is the India way. I think the India way would be a country which brings its capacities to bear on the international system for global good, which is a net security provider, which is a contributor to connectivity, which is firm in dealing with challenges like terrorism, which has its values and practices, which addresses global issues like climate change. That would be one. Two, the India way now especially would be to be more of a decider or a shaper rather than an abstainer. And I would here pick issues like climate change or connectivity as issues where India has made a difference in the last few years. Three, I would say India owes it to itself and to the world to be a just power, a fair power, to be a standard bearer for the South. I think it's part of our history, it's part of our political inheritance. I think India must live up to those obligations in a practical way and be the voice for the South. And finally, the India way would be really brand India, brand India in terms of what is unique to us as a power. The fact that we have this extraordinary diaspora which connects us in a way in which it does to very few powers. The fact that today we would be increasingly a pool of global talent, that our heritage, our traditions, what you've seen happen with yoga or what you see now happen with Indian traditional medicine, and also more in a more modern way, I would say shaping the discourse, even the international relations discourse. That the concepts, the ideas, the debates, what is it that India will do? And I think there are obviously the India way will be tested against global issues. Global issues like connectivity, maritime security, climate change, counterterrorism, democratic values, technology challenges of the kind which was discussed this morning and yesterday evening. I think all of that is part of the India way.
So, sir, let me dive into a couple of issues that you have described. Let's talk about India as a contributor to some of the global aspirations, global infrastructure, global connectivity projects. There is a assessment that we make these big claims of being an actor in the connectivity space. We don't deliver. We don't know how to complete projects. We are good talkers. We are not great builders.
Uh, I think it's a somewhat unfair observation, and definitely with regard to the last 5 years, an extremely outdated observation. And I'll tell you why. Right now, let me take the last 5 years, okay? We have, by my estimate, 142 connectivity projects in different parts of the world, 53 of whom have been completed in the last 5 years. You said we don't deliver. So let me start with the neighborhood. What is it which we have delivered? So if you take Bangladesh, I think pretty much the pre-1965 road and rail connections which were disrupted are all today being restored. We have connectivity projects underway in waterways, in ports, in roads and rail. If you look at Nepal, there are a whole set of roads which have been completed, which in southern Nepal, which connect the two. There's a sea change in Nepal's electricity situation because of transmission projects, which, by the way, began in the last 5 years and have been completed. You have a pipeline of fuel from India to Motihari, Amlekganj to Nepal. If you take Sri Lanka, actually, I would say really the rebuilding of the Sri Lankan rail network after their civil war was over was really done by India. If you look at at Afghanistan, you know again, whether it's electricity transmission, whether it's road networks, I mean, all of those have happened. So I think to some degree, India is a prisoner of its past image. We have to get behind that. And now I was talking the immediate neighborhood, but I could go beyond. I mean, as soon as this conference is over, I'm going to Niger to inaugurate a convention center which we built in 14 months, which would be among the largest convention centers in that part of the world. In fact, if I look around in Africa, you know, we've done hydel projects in Sudan, we've done in Rwanda, in DRC, we have sugar factories in Ethiopia. So, you know, what has happened is, I accept there was a time when we probably spoke more and did less. Today, what has happened, possibly not as conscious strategy, but we are actually doing more than we speak.
So let me pick up another sector, sir. Climate. Now, let me ask you about climate change. Again, I think while of course we have seen in the last 5 years there is a different discourse in Delhi, and we have seen the mushrooming of huge solar energy projects. But are we punching at our weight in terms of what is needed globally to respond to climate change? You heard last night from the experience of the former head of governments and states that climate is something of concern to all of us. Is India contributing enough?
You know, something told me you were going to bring up climate change.
I know those some things were 7 people here.
Yeah, right, sure. So you know what I did was, I got the climate. It's called the Climate Action Tracker Rating List. Okay, I don't know how many of you have seen it, but if you haven't, let me read it out for you. This is how the climate change policies, actions of governments have been rated. And this is, by the way, a December 2019 rating. So the highest category you get is something called role model. Okay. So the role model, by the way, is Morocco and Gambia. Okay. Then the next category are countries who have kept to the Paris Agreement 1.5 degree compatible commitments. Now here's the list, okay, and this you'll find very interesting. Philippines, Kenya, Ethiopia, Costa Rica, Bhutan, and India. Okay, I repeat, Philippines, Kenya, Ethiopia, Costa Rica, Bhutan, and India. So now who goes into the next category? 2%, 2 degree. Switzerland, Peru, Norway, New Zealand, Mexico, Kazakhstan, EU, Canada. Next category, by the way, they give up on the numbers, they just call them insufficient. This is UAE, South Korea, South Africa, Singapore, Japan, Indonesia, China, Chile, Argentina.
That's pretty much our attendee list.
yeah, the last category is really diplomatically worded. It's called highly insufficient. It's United States, Russian Federation, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Ukraine, and Vietnam. So does that answer your question?
Partly, okay, I'm going to let you ask him on that. Okay, so let me move to the next thing that you raised, technology. That was another area that we spoke about yesterday. Now, as someone who engages with the technology sector and who came from the technology sector, I sometimes feel that we hear this huge buzz and conversations around the US tech, China tech, as being the dominant ecosystems that are defining the 21st century. And I feel sad sometimes that we have not done enough through our international engagements to promote what is clearly a strong sector, the India tech. We are creating bottom of pyramid solutions, and I know about that. But I sometimes feel, are we still not integrating technology into our diplomatic endeavors, taking it to the world, trying to create a whole new framework, a whole new approach to technology?
Um, well, look, I'll answer that from a slightly different perspective. I'm not a tech person, but I'm in the image business. Okay, uh, and what happened was between the dot-com revolution and Y2K, uh, the image of a sort of a techie Indians actually took firm root all over the world. I mean, many of us who were traveling and working abroad actually saw in those 10 years how Indians were perceived very differently. But your point, if you look at today sources of tech, where is the innovation, I would accept that we didn't move to that next level, and my guess, and this is in a sense the intuitive feel of an outsider to this domain, would be that possibly because the kind of attention today that we are giving to startups and we are giving to digital development, what has come in the last 5 years, if it had come earlier, possibly we could have been sort of higher up the chain. But I still believe that the digital domain is ripe for catching up. I think it's I mean everywhere, including from revolutions, there's a theory of the late entrant having a advantage. So the my sense is it is conceivable if we go the direction we now seem to be going, that you could perhaps in the I don't know the 8th or the 10th edition of Raisina, we could be having a very different conversation on this.
Let me expand that question a bit. Recently we read in the newspapers you have actually created a division within the ministry, which is looking at emerging technologies. And again, I want to pose a question: is that a zero-sum division that is trying to protect India's sovereign interests in the new technology domain, or is it a division that is also going to be promoting India tech and taking those technologies to the world?
Look,
With a development and a digital public goods focus that the Prime Minister spoke about some months ago.
well, first of all, the technology division we've created is in a ministry which, by its very task, mandate, is a promotional ministry, is an analysis ministry. So it's not a regulation issue. What would what is our sort of thinking behind that? I would say there are two broad elements. One, there are technologies which are strategic by their nature. Okay, and it's important for a ministry which analyzes foreign affairs, which contributes to national security, to have a set of people who are competent and trained and focused to analyze those strategically relevant technologies. The second is there are technologies which, when in the hands of strategic players, become strategic. So some of it is the nature of technology, some of it is the user of technology and the deployment of technology and the intent of technology. Some of it was discussed by the panel yesterday. So I think it's a mix of that. Today we can't, I think it's no longer realistic to deal with technology as economics, which used to be the old-fashioned way 20, 30 years ago. Today technology is very much strategy, and I think we need to. That's what, in a sense, we are responding to.
Um, Moving from domains to geographies, I think that we also yesterday at the in the opening session and in the dinner conversations heard about uh, important developments that will implicate all of us. Uh, so let me start with, since I can see Foreign Minister Zarif here, let me start with Iran. And you're someone, if I remember correctly, you were in DC and then you were in Iran.
That was scheduling.
Okay, so no, I'm not implicating your travels to what happened, but you know, what does India do? At this moment, are we a bystander and an onlooker? Are we someone who's going to be implicated by what's happening, or are we going to be shaping what's happening? And I think that's the question that some of us are asking.
Well, look, I think you would get a small part answer from me. You would get a larger part answer from Minister Zarif. But I would say this, I mean, uh, where the United States and Iran are concerned, I mean, these are two obviously very individualistic, independent-minded players. So and they have had a fairly recent history of dealing with each other. Uh, so uh, so I think for countries like us, and when I was in Tehran and discussing with Minister Zarif, uh, our issues are really reflective of concerns which India and frankly most of the international community has about the direction of events in that part of the world, because what happens finally will depend on the players. But what is important for us is, there are parts of the world where perhaps the stakes are less and the implications of it for the world are less. But this is enormously important. And therefore, in the developments that you've seen in the last few days, I mean, it was natural for countries in the world who obviously had interests out there to talk to each other, to consult with each other, to discuss with the parties concerned as well, and which is why we had a conversation as I did with many other ministers. But at the end of the day, it is the ball is really in their court.
So you are also seen by many in New Delhi and perhaps around the world to be a realist, and I'll use a diplomatic term, a realist on China. You know, in the last 6 months.
That's a political science term. It's not a diplomatic term.
So how would you assess this relationship, and where do you think we are headed
Which are?
with China?
Look, I I would say, I mean, it's not where are we headed. To my mind, there is a certain requirement for both countries. I mean, neither country can actually get this relationship wrong. And the reason is this. One, we are neighbors, okay? And whatever you might say, it's vital for neighbors to sort of reach understandings as a general principle. And by the way, generally being neighbors, it's often because you have issues as neighbors. There are the challenges which come out of it. But the India-China relationship, I think, is a very unique characteristic, which is that very rarely in history have two powers who are neighbors actually gone up in the international order in approximately the same time frame. So each one of the countries is sort of reaching a new equilibrium with the world, but also with each other at the same time. I think it's very important today that it's to my mind absolutely necessary that the two countries find an equilibrium and find accommodation and understanding on the key issues which affect each other. So for me, this is a must. It's not a choice. And I'm reasonably sure somebody strategic in China would have a similar view. The challenge would be, it's not do you get along with each other or not get along with each other. As I said, to me, that's not a choice. I mean, we have to get along with each other. The challenge is what are the terms and, what is the basis and how does it actually work? I mean, and that's where, I would say it is work in progress, and it will continue to be work in progress because both powers are very dynamic in terms of where they stand. I mean, today, at least in economic, if we kind of do an economic ranking, you can say, well, China is the number 2 in the world and India is number 5 or number 6 in the world. Probably within the space of a decade, we'd probably be 2 and 3. And maybe in the space of the next quarter of century, I don't even know what our numbers are going to be. So, if you are going to be 2 and 3, and then you're going to be neighbors, and you are the dynamic forces of the world, I mean, ask yourself what, clearly the logic of reaching an understanding is a very, very powerful logic.
Let's move to the next relationship, which is of importance. And we had Foreign Minister Lavrov with us this morning, and you saw the excitement in the hall and outside. Have we moved beyond nostalgia with Russia? From the Soviet times, that relationship.
I like nostalgia. I started my career in Moscow, so I'm entitled to nostalgia. But look, I would say something about the Russia relationship, and I've reflected on it a great deal. Just think of the last 50, 60 years, okay, maybe a little bit more. All the major centers of power have had fluctuations in their interstate relationship. Russia, America, Russia, Europe, Russia, China, a lot of volatility there. America, India, America, China, America, Europe till now was steady, some volatility now. Now, if you kind of plot these interstate relationships, to my mind, actually an extraordinarily steady relationship has been one between India and Russia. It's actually a standout relationship for its consistency. And it has intrigued me why that is so. When, the best answers that I can come up with, and I'm open to more explanations, on the one hand, it's very deeply rooted in a sort of a geopolitical understanding, if you would. I think there is a fundamental Eurasian underpinning to this relationship, which is often unspoken, but it sort of expresses itself in different ways. And the other is, it has also been sustained by strong sentiment. And I think sentiment should never be underestimated in international relations. Look, my mother is today pushing 90, okay. She still remembers standing on the streets in Delhi and welcoming Khrushchev and Bulganin in 1955, the year I was born. It still is there in her mind. So if you look at actually what is popular, what does the street say? I think we tend to underestimate the contribution of the street to shaping foreign policy attitudes. And I think the street has held very steady on Russia. I would say when it comes to United States, actually the street has changed. The United States was not the most popular country a few decades ago, but today look at the street sentiment. So it's very, it's a very interesting.
Let me push you on that particular point. United States. I think let's move to United States. Are we under delivering in terms of the potential of that relationship? And I'm coming from the street side. If you talk to the business folks, you talk to the cultural folks, you talk to political scientists, my community, the academics, we have a far greater degree of convergence and integration than what you would read in the newspapers when you hear our foreign ministry speaking to their State Department on a number of issues. Do you think we are lagging behind in what we are doing in strategic terms versus what the streets would really want the relationship to be?
Well, look, I don't mean to be disrespectful of the media, but I think by its very nature, the media focuses on the formal processes, on where there are issues of difference or divergence, and you know, if there are 10 things which you say positively about each other, but the 11th one is not, that's the one they'll home in on, and that's their business. Okay, I understand that. So I don't think we are under delivering on the relationship. In fact, I think the challenge has been really to sort of channel the energies and the positive sentiments. And if you look today, I mean, there's virtually no area of activity where India and the United States don't work with each other and deal with each other. I mean, it is sort of, it used to be a very G to G and not always positively G to G. It is today our biggest B to B. There's a high element of B to G. There's a T to T, tech to tech. There's a P to P, people to people. So, I mean, you tell me, I mean, I pick a sector and I will show you something substantive happening in that relationship. So, and my sense is, the changes which happen in the United States, in a sense, the bilateralizing of the United States, the fact that the United States, for a variety of reasons, is looking beyond alliances, and also the fact that we are moving into a more knowledge-driven world where, the importance of talent and innovation would be more for global politics and global strategy, global power. I think those are all promising opportunities for really taking this relationship forward.
So I'm going to be opening it up to all of you to come in. We'll take a few questions, and as is the custom in at Raisina, and certainly when I moderate, I'm going to give 2 interventions to our young fellows, and Amelia and Alistair are going to be posing those interventions. But before you do that, let me just ask a short, quick question, because I just remembered I got a message from a friend of mine in Brussels. And he says, your foreign minister's visit is here. He's come and met think tank. The Europeans are surprised by your outreach to them. Is that relationship changing? In a positive way. I mean, I received a message that he's come so early into his, 6 months ago, you were in Europe, you were meeting think tanks, and I was getting messages. And do you think that relationship is something that is changing also, the India-EU?
Look, I mean, if you you said we have, I forget the word you use, under delivered or, underperformed in a way. You asked me if we underperformed with the US. I think actually, if you ask me if there's a relationship where we are underperforming, very honestly, I would say it's much more with Europe. And I think both sides need to focus more. I mean, Europe, actually, if you take the European Union as a whole, I think it's actually our largest trade partner. It's actually our largest financial partner. If you can estimate tech with some index, it would be a very substantial tech partner. But on the other hand, collectively with Europe, I mean, we still deal a lot with individual states on a national basis. I think collectively with Europe, and also with a lot of not so large European nations, I think there's enormous scope to grow. There's scope to grow because, whether you look in terms of technology, best practices, innovative solutions, opportunities for business both ways. Even look, there are places in Europe, I mean, Indians are going to be traveling more. So whether it's air connectivity, tourism, visa issues, I mean, I think there's a lot of headroom out there. But for me, what probably mattered most was we aren't having the I would say the kind of political strategic conversations with Europe on a collective basis and on a, I would say, subgroup basis that we should be having. And my interest in traveling to Europe was really to see if I could kind of energize those relationships a little bit more.
So Amelia, let's start with you. And those who want to ask questions can move to mics near the aisle, and I'm going to probably take another couple. So can we collect 3 or 4 of them? Great. So Amelia.
Thank you, Samir, and thank you very much, Minister, for your comments. My question to you is, as we look forward to Prime Minister Morrison's visit to India early this year, what do you think are the most important steps in taking forward the Australia-India relationship?
Alistair.
Other than letting us win in cricket?
So, thank you very much, Minister. You spoke about the Indian way, the importance for practical actions in the China-India relationship, but also now the need for strategic discussions in India's relations with Europe. So my question is, what is the Indian vision, but also the real-world actions required to fully realise the Indian way of global governance and the rules-based international system?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part?
Sorry. So on the last question, the question is, so what is the Indian vision for global governance and the rules-based international system?
Okay.
And what are the practical actions required
To make that happen.
realise that?
Okay. Excellent. There was a hand there. Yes, please. Go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Hello. Hello, sir. I'm Prakhar Kumar. I'm an aspiring civil servant. My question is, sir, it is said that power is not given, it has to be taken. So, has India shied away from taking power? Like, India can mediate between Iran, US, Russia, Israel, Palestine, but India has always shied away from taking power. India has always talked about being an emerging global power, but has not taken the power. So, what do you think? India is better off staying away from the complex issues, or should India take these opportunities? Thank you.
Okay, let me take one more and then I'll come back to you. The lady there, please.
Good morning, sir. Thank you so much for your comments. I'm Dr. Swasti. I teach security and strategic studies at Aligarh Muslim University. And I have a very specific question for you, which is that on the one hand, as you keep saying, that India would like to engage with China in more constructive ways. But on the other hand, India's denial of joining the RCEP, despite Japan, its close ally, pushing for it. So in your opinion, do you think this is a kind of a disbalance, in India's perspective towards economic multilateralism? And the other thing is that I understand
One question.
India's
One
reservation.
question. I'll limit it to one question.
All right,
That's a fair
you.
question.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the last one. The lady here. Near the mic. I'm sorry, I'm going as per order of.
My name is Tripti Nath. I work for the Asahi Shimbun, Japan's leading newspaper. Connectivity and development have been the underlying...
Can you come closer to the mic so that we can hear you? Or can you take the mic in your hand? Maybe that's easier. Yeah.
Connectivity and development have been the underlining principles of Narendra Modi's governance from day one, and that has also been the USP. There was a lot of excitement when the bullet train project started with Japan, and Mr. Modi has an extraordinary equation with Shinzo Abe, and that has really set things going. But on the domestic fronts, there have been, along with the excitement, a lot of anxiety over the delivery date of the project, and there have been concerns that because of litigation over land acquisition, we may not be able to deliver things on track. To what extent is this going to affect India's relationship with Japan? Thank you.
Okay. Well, let me start with the Australia question. I think it's not a secret that we had hoped very much that the Australian Prime Minister would have been here at the Raisina Dialogue, and he had compulsions at home, which we completely understand. There's an extraordinary situation there. Had he come, I think you would have seen really a number of developments pertaining to the India-Australia relationship unfold. I would keep some of them in reserve because he will come in the fairly near future, and I don't want to jump the gun on that. But if I were to sort of give you a vision kind of description, I mean, today we really think that India-Australia relationships is today poised for sort of a big jump because part of it is that when we look at the world, if you look at the strategic picture, we look at the political picture, I think we are two countries who sort of our interests and our, shall I say, our approaches are really very convergent. And there's also a realization that countries like India and Australia need to step up and play a greater role in terms of global responsibilities, regional responsibilities, because there is a growing deficit in that regard. We've had particularly, in recent years, very, very good conversations with our Australian counterparts, I with mine and Prime Minister with his. We are very confident today that both of us have, each one has the other country more salient in their calculations and planning. So we are today trying to translate that kind of approach into practical outcomes, which is where do we work together, what do we do, what are the exchanges. So, the kind of issues that I laid out, which I think today are the big global challenges: counterterrorism, maritime security, connectivity. These are all issues where we've actually worked very, very well with Australia. In terms of, what is a vision in terms of, what is India's global vision? Look, I think for every country, and particularly bigger countries, you will be abroad what you are at home. There will be an extrapolation of your personality, of your national personality, of your national culture in a way. So a lot of what we want to be abroad, the kind of world we want to see, I mean, we are a political democracy, we are a pluralistic society, we are a market economy, we have historically been very open to the world. I think you will see all those traits reflect themselves. You can actually, if you look at Indian positions, that I think is very evident. What perhaps has changed is that with greater capacities and more influence, probably, what would have been a preference or an opinion would today be perhaps expressed a little more firmly and decisively than that. On the issue of, is India this taking power, giving power? Look, I wouldn't quite put it the way you had posed the question. I think today, certainly for a country like India, it is much more issue of influence. I would be more comfortable with that than taking power sort of thing. And I would I think the image of being reluctant, of shying away, I don't think holds true anymore. And I'd pick one particular domain as illustrative of this. People speak of being a net security provider. Great. Okay, look just at the Indian Ocean region. Today, India has 16 white shipping agreements. It has given naval equipment, ships, to 8 of its Indian Ocean neighbors. It has coastal surveillance radars in 6 of its countries. It has done 7 HADR operations in the last 5 years, major HADR operations. It has today extended defense lines of credit close to $2 billion to 11 countries. It has trained more than 1,000 troops in the last 5 years. It has military training teams in 11 countries. It does hydrography cooperation with 5 of its maritime neighbors. So I put that to you saying, look, this is a practical example. I'm giving you numbers, region, places, which shows really where our influence is going. Regarding the RCEP, where RCEP is concerned, at the end of the day, RCEP is an FTA. Okay, it has to be evaluated on its trade merits, its gains, and its costs and its benefits. I think the bottom line at Bangkok was that the offers that were on the table did not match up to what we thought were our bottom line requirements. We haven't closed the door on it, but the fact was there was a gap, and there was a substantial gap out there, and therefore we took the call that we did. So, the ball is in the court of the countries concerned, whether they make it worth our while. But we would evaluate RCEP at the end of the day on the economic or the trade merits of RCEP. And finally, the high-speed rail question. Look, big projects will have problems. Projects don't come easy, and particularly projects which involve, land and construction and so on. So I won't, to be honest, I don't have such a detailed fix as to give you the sort of answers like timelines and so on. But my broad sense is that, look, both countries are committed. It's a prestigious project. It's a major project. It will make a technology difference in India when it comes in. And certainly, I would imagine both countries will do their utmost to find something which works for both of them.
So, time is up, but before we go, I have to ask you this question. Since you took charge as the foreign minister, we've had interesting times in India. The Kashmir issue, the Citizen Amendment Bill, shutdowns, etc. What do you tell the world when you go out?
About them?
Lots is happening here. I'm sure people ask you questions, right? They are real questions.
Well, look, what I tell the world is, if you look at a lot of this, partly the world has common challenges. Terrorism is a common challenge. Separatism is a common challenge. Migration is a common challenge. So don't think that these are problems which are unique to India. This is a national variant of what are challenges in many parts of the world. And I think when people look at it and assess it and analyze it, they should, in fairness, ask themselves, how did they respond to it? They've also been in stress situations. They would have had, disturbances in the neighbors. Europe saw it in North Africa. You've had, a large part of the world saw it when 9/11 happened. How did they all respond to this? So when you look at a country like India, which is dealing with these common challenges, the national variant of those common challenges, I think it's important to in a sense, reflect on your own way of handling it. Even something like naturalization, what is the pathway that other nations have taken in regard to naturalization of people? I think it's worthwhile looking at it. What are global norms on a lot of these issues? So that's one thought. The second thought would be, don't get fixated on the dots and forget the line. There is these are important issues. I'm not understating them. But at the end of the day, they reflect a mindset towards governance. And a lot of what's happened in the last 6 months are sort of in the political sphere. But the same mindset was also evident when it came to socio-economic issues, when it came to issues like gender gaps, when it came to sanitation, when it came to urbanization, when it came to skills, digital, etc. So the bottom line is, are we going to sort of just inherit problems, multiply them and pass them on? Or are we going to deal with at least some of the inherited problems and probably leave the people who come after us better off than when we came to power? I think that is an issue. Obviously, people ask you these questions because we live in a connected world. No country is an island. I don't have any problem with that. I think people are entitled to have opinions, but people are also entitled to have opinions on other people's opinions. So I think life should be a two-way street. I would say, this conference, for example, has often spoken, one of our themes has been rebalancing of the world. Okay. I think issues like this, what am I doing? Fine. You are free to comment. But I also would respond and react to all of that. And for me, one aspect of rebalancing where India is concerned is, today, are we going to define ourselves or are we going to let other people define us? I would like to believe that it's the first. Certainly, that's my political outlook. It's the political outlook of the government and of my party.
Thank you very much, sir. Please join me in applauding him for his very frank interventions this morning.